Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Roundtable with the smartest man in London, Ian Putk, and, of course, our very favorite, Gary Villapiano. Hey, everybody. Good to see you guys today.
Good to see you, Danny.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invite, as always. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. It's always our pleasure. And, I just wonder, first of all, kind of how you're doing, because you've been under the weather for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I work 7 days a week. I'm never off sick, am I, Natalie? No. Natalie's just leaving now from our office, and I had to have 2 weeks off and losing my voice and all the rest of it. I mean, it was a blessing to lots of other people. I would suggest that was the only.
I doubt that very seriously.
Well, but, Ian, when you say you work 7 days a week, you're in a gin distillery. So does that mean you're doing taste testings? What's this working mean?
I couldn't possibly. I plead the fifth on that. But no, I run a plumbing. My core business is a plumbing company. The gin distillery.
So they say.
Yeah, that old chestnut. But yeah, no. So the plumbing is unbelievably busy. The gin is just a sideline, for want of a better word. We have the ultimate. I know we've discussed this before, but we have the ultimate customer list. You know, Buckingham Palace, the House of Lords, the Foreign Office, NATO, the Ministry of Defence, and Harrods, Fulton and Masons. We have such cool customers.
And, I got to ask, because you're not a big volume dealer, how do you land those really cool contracts?
Well, I'm quite chatty, and I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and ring somebody up that I've never spoken to in my life and say, hi, I understand you're responsible for blah, blah, blah. Can I come and see you? And that's what I do. I really do. Yeah. I really do. I really do.
Well, I can certainly see. I obviously, other people also think you're the smartest man in London, or at least the best gin maker. So I can see where that would come from. Well, listen, one of the things I want to start off chatting about today, and by the way, for those who may not know, this is kind of a new feature that we're going to be doing here, because we just can't have Ian on just ever so often. We need to make it more regular, because he's got too many good things to say. So this is just the next one in line here. But one of the things that's on the radar today, probably not positively from the U.S. side, there's some comments made by JD Vance that were leaked on a Signal chat. Everybody's mainly focused on the issue about, was there classified information on it? It was about a U.S. strike against the Yemens or the Houthis rather in Yemen. That's where most of the discussion has been. But some of the discussion, that's what it has been here in the United States. But in Europe, they're focused on a little bit different part of this, and that's something that JD Vance said, which was very derogatory towards Europe. We're going to get to that in just a second, but just to remind people, and probably why that comment was a little more agitated than it might otherwise be, is because something Vance said, and I think it was February at the Munich Security Conference.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
That was Vice President JD Vance at the Munich Security Conference in mid-February, expressing a dim view of the current state of European democracies and raising questions about the future of the transatlantic alliance. That attitude was on full display in a text group chat on Signal that many top administration officials had every reason to believe was private, wherein the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, referred to, quote, freeloading European countries as, quote, pathetic.
Okay, so there's the tweet right there where Hegseth said to the vice president, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. Wow, that's really strong. And I mean, just tell me, just off the cuff there, how was that comment received in the UK?
Well, again, it's all about perspectives. It's all about information control. It depends on what you know and what you don't know. But as you know, Trump has always said, and I'm not a massive Trumper, but Trump has always said that NATO, the Americans, well, certainly the Americans pay more for European security than the Europeans do themselves. And he's always said that they need to pay more and to bring it up in line with what the Americans are contributing. Now, whether you like that or not, or whether you disagree, there is a sense of fairness to say that I'm going to put my resources and my money to back you up, so you need to up your game. It's a fair conversation to be had, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that's particularly unfair. Obviously, if you've now got to cough up some more money and got to find that money when you don't have it, then you're not going to be very happy. So it's all about information and perspectives and where you stand on the subject.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what is some of the people, and now then just broaden your paintbrush here a little bit, just throughout Europe that you're aware of, that you see, because many of them don't think that they're freeloading. They think that they're providing a lot. And do they agree with this freeloading comment?
No, not at all. I mean, if you speak to people at the Ministry of Defence, people in the army, they will wholeheartedly say that we completely depend on the US. Without the US, we're nothing. And if you look at that statistically, if you look at the British forces, whether that be the Army, the Navy, or the Royal Air Force combined, it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. So we are completely dependent on the UK. If you look at all of the bases in the UK, including the secret ones that do exist, believe it or not, they're all run by the Americans. Look at Ramstein in Germany. It's just an American base, which is absolutely huge. So
yeah,
you know,
I've been there many times.
Yeah, so to all intents and purposes, we are in the hands of the US. But we now have a US leader that's saying, hang on, we're doing all of this, we're spending all of this money, you need to up your game. And they're not prepared for that conversation. That's the reality, I think.
And Gary, looking at it from the U.S. side, first of all, let's back up prior to January 20th. Really, every president, you can just run all the way back, even to George Bush, maybe even Clinton for that matter. It's always been kind of a statement. Oh, well, they need to get their fair share. Europe needs to spend at least 2% of GDP, and they wrote, all these rules. Nobody ever did anything about it. Nobody ever held anybody to account. They didn't have that percentage. Only a handful actually did up until very recently. Mm-hmm. And so the Americans kind of really weren't all that interested in it. But now it's kind of changed. How do you see that on the U.S. side?
Yeah, I don't think even Americans were even aware of that. Anybody that's not, hardcore foreign policy minded. So it was when Trump first came in on Trump version 1. Where he actually started to say that and hold them accountable. And now, Trump version 2 here is picking up the ball again. I mean, that's his claim to fame, really, that he's all our previous leaders were just dumb when regarding this, and we were taken advantage of. And that's, he's smart to do this. He's able to run on that, meaning, as far as his reputation goes as being, a smart businessman. So he's bringing all his business sensibilities into the politics. So, he looks like, an economic hero in a sense on that level, in that realm.
At least to his followers. But then you got all these other,
right,
I guess, neocons who still are just, their heads are blowing up about this because, and this is what I don't understand. I genuinely have a hard time getting this. All of these folks in the American side, whether the left or the right, that are upset at Trump for saying that, hey, they need to pull their fair share and they need to pay more, whatever.
Yeah.
Why do they think that it's okay or even beneficial for the U.S. to keep on subsidizing all of this stuff? Why is that our job to do?
I feel I'm at school and I'm raising my hand.
Jump right in. No hands allowed.
Please, sir, can I have some more?
Chime in. We're go ahead.
So what I was going to say, you said about some of the previous leaders were a bit stupid, a bit slow, and were taken advantage of. I actually don't believe that for one moment. I believe that because the US has been run by neocons for so long, the neocons are very happy to hemorrhage everybody else's money, i.e. US taxpayers, so that they can have their interested parties, the CIA and the army and all of these special forces all over the place, so they can control everything. So they're happy to pay for that. But now you've got a leader in charge that is focusing on US domestic policy, and rightly so, by the way. So there's a huge change. So he's now saying, hang on, we're hemorrhaging all this money on these guys that aren't grateful. Hang on, we should be spending that at home. And I think that's a fair discussion to be had. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, there's the kickbacks are probably amazing. Who wants to stop the kickbacks?
Yeah, of course. But it's all about information. I'll tell you, I'm very happy to tell you this off air. I won't say it on air. So there's a really secret military base here in central London. I won't say what it's called, but it's completely run by the Americans. I mean, there's all various levels. I've only been to a very small level. and there's a room in there where they talk directly with the Pentagon. It's got the same coordinates as a room in the Pentagon, and I'll tell you about that separately. But it's completely run by the Americans, and we were happy. I'm very happy for that to be run by the Americans. But now, hang on, it's going to cost us a little bit more. Well, now we're not so happy. Well, you can't have it both ways, if that makes sense.
Ian, where do you get your inside information, Ian?
I'll tell you.
Yeah, you know what?
That's what we're here for, Ian. That's what this roundtable is for. We've got to get.
Okay, I'll answer that question.
We've got to get to the bottom of it.
No, I'll tell you what. So that particular base that I've just talked about in central London. So when I was a management consultant, so going back to 2001, was it 2001, 2002? I went there and I was working as an acting communications director for a media company in central London, and my job was to build business for them, new customers. And I managed to get into the I got into military intelligence at Wellington Barracks in central London. And from there, I obviously network. You build relationships with people. They like you, you like them. You're talking about ideas. You've got an idea. How can we expand this idea? How can we make it better? How can we improve it? So you start talking to people, and you just network through it. Now, if that was IBM or a supermarket, you would meet the leadership and work your way through. It's no different to the military. Just see it as an organization, and you find out who the decision makers are and also who the decision influencers are. The influencers might not be able to give you an order, but they might be able to influence the people that do place orders with you. So that's all I did. So I got in there where we were looking at alternative forms of communication. So do you want to hear all this?
Yes, it's great.
Yeah. So if there was a war, and all the telephone networks went down, and we were at the most base level of communications, how can you still communicate? And I was trying to sell them a very, very basic, very, very simple, and I really mean simple, trust me, system, and put it on their radar. And the system was so simple, they had never considered it. And because they were considering it, I got to meet all of the top brass and the people that would be involved in that decision-making process. So that was in 2001, the first time I went in there. And then in 2000, at the beginning of lockdown, I wrote to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and I wrote a letter to the head, a guy called Mark, his surname's just gone. He was the head of the civil service for Great Britain. So he's the most senior civil servant in Great Britain. And I hand-delivered the letter to him on a Sunday night in March 2020. And the next morning, I got emails from the army, the police, the National Health Service. I now had ins everywhere. So, I could have emailed those. I actually physically drove to Whitehall in central London and put the letter through a letterbox on Whitehall. And
did you ever get to hear back from Boris Johnson?
No. So the police all turned up. I'm cutting a very long story short. The police would not let me deliver anything. I was on Whitehall at 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. And about 20 police officers standing around saying, we can't get hand sanitizer. And I said, well, I can make you some in 3 days. And I had a letter, and I'd left the letter in the envelope open. I had one for Boris Johnson and exactly Mark Sedwell, and a second one for Mark Sedwell, the head of the civil service. And they eventually, after making phone calls, let me walk up. And by that time, the security guards had come out, and I handed these two guys a letter. And the next morning, I heard from Mark Sedwell's office, and I was now talking to the heart of government. But I get up and do things. I don't talk. I don't sit there emailing, hoping something will happen. I really go for anyone that knows me will tell you I do that.
Well, and now we're starting to get a grip.
What an old school approach, and it worked for you. Hand delivery.
It works.
Well, yeah, especially if you're the smartest man in London, and now people are starting to see why you're the smartest man in London, because you know how to get things done old school in a new school world, and that takes some skill to do.
in 2004, I got the contract to broadcast the Queen's Christmas message. So every year at Christmas, the Queen gives an address to the nation on Christmas Day. It's recorded at the end of October. And I got the contract from Buckingham Palace. I got paid to make the Queen's Christmas message available on the telephone network. So you could watch it on TV on Christmas Day, you could listen to it on the radio, and now you could pick up any telephone on the planet and listen free of charge to the Queen's Christmas message.
Wow.
And it wasn't on a loop. Whenever you called in, you got it from the very, very beginning. It wasn't halfway through. It wasn't a recording. So just doing different things. Yeah, just doing different things.
Can you put the Daniel Davis deep dive on a deal like that? I mean, that might be cool, man. I don't know if anybody wants to see it, but I'm just thinking out loud too. So we'll see how that works. But okay, so I want to get back to the topic at hand here, because there's a lot of different views, both in the United States and in Europe as well. And definitely there's a lot of people that are pretty aggravated about this, and especially on the issue there about freeloading. Here is a broadcast on LBC after the fact here, and well, they have a different take.
The last payment on the Anglo-American loan, this was a loan made to the United Kingdom, enabling its economy to stay afloat after the Second World War. Do you know who negotiated it? John Maynard Keynes. The last payment on that loan that was made in July of 1946 was made, wait for it, on the 29th of December 2006. That's freeloading Europe for you, repaying post-war debts for 60 years after the war ended.
I'm more curious about JD Vance himself, because as you say, I don't think he's not a dim man. I think he's pretty bright. And I wonder how he seems to be one of the most vehement anti-Europeans.
Yes.
It strikes me that how can he consistently hold the views that he does, these rather sort of odd views about Europe's laws and all the rest of it, so consistently, when he could do a lot of research and find out that actually what he's spouting is absolute rubbish.
And so, the question has to be asked. This was, now, unlike what he said at the Munich Security Conference, this was, he thought, was being private, and along with him and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. So this would seem more like what they must really feel. And just, how does that strike people that, they have such negative views at the highest levels of the U.S.?
They're just on a different page. They're just on, and I've said this before on your show, but it's the only way to describe it. They're on a complete different page. So, is Vance and Trump and all his anti-European? Of course not. I mean, look at European culture. It's rich. It's interesting. The history is just wonderful. The food and the drink and the lifestyles are great. So what is it that they don't like about Europe? It's just one thing. So we've had the neocons in there. Biden and Blinken and all those warmongers wanting war with Russia, happy to fund the war against Russia to the last Ukrainian bit of blood, fund it with all of the US taxpayers' money, happy for all of that. And we have a new administration that doesn't want that. And the narrative that we've all been fed in Europe, I get called a Kremlin puppet and all sorts of things. I mean, it's just insane. And I'm polite and respectful. I'm not here ranting and raving or swearing or raising my voice. Questioning the narrative is enough to be called a Putin parrot, a Kremlin. It's just insane. And that culture's happened. How do you create a culture in any organization? Well, firstly, it comes from the top, never comes from the bottom. Culture in any organization works down from the top. And we have been subjugated for so long to, with this hysteria of, Kremlin and Russian and Soviet era politics. I've said it before some time ago on some of your shows. I was at an RAF event, Royal Air Force, and we were supplying gin and tonics to fighter pilots, intelligent guys, young guys, smart guys. Guy got his phone out and showed me. He showed myself and my colleague what he called, have you ever seen shooting stars coming out of the sea? And it was Russian submarines. This is in 2022, by the way. And they're literally cruise missiles just coming out of the sea at night. I mean, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And he was just telling me that, the Russians are really demobilized. The Russian army, when you join the Russian army, you have to bring your own, bring your own, we would call them shoes or trainers, because the Russian army is so poorly equipped, they can't afford that. I said, but they can afford cruise missiles. And he went, yeah, that's where all the money goes. That's where, wow, he knocked me out with that one. I mean, it's just insane. But he believed it. He wasn't stupid. He just believed the propaganda because he lives in that military bubble, and that military bubble has to be hostile to Russia for it to work. You know, if you knew the facts and you're able to discuss them openly and have considered debate and to exercise some critical thinking, it would all collapse. So there's no tolerance for that. And that's the problem with America and Europe. We're on completely different pages. We were on the same page not that long ago, but we're not anymore.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Definitely not anymore. And Gary, I want to kind of riff off something Ian just said there, because he kind of pointed out something that I think is valid and also maybe confusing. Because on the one hand, obviously, Americans visit Europe by the millions every year. They love to go to Europe. A lot of these senior leaders, they love to go to Europe. They've enjoyed going to Germany on that in February at that event, etc. But then they make these comments here. Is there a difference between what they say about Europe and what they actually feel about Europe on the U.S. side?
No, I'm not sure, Danny. Is it all just theater? I think there's something behind. You mean like with Vance, was he just just mouthing off? I think there's besides trying to promote Trump's agenda worldwide, how much does he believe in it as a as an individual? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. He's got his own ideas, coming up in 2028, right? So he maybe just wants to. I think maybe Vance just really wants to piggyback on the momentum that's there already.
Although you say 2028, according to Steve Bannon, that's going to be Donald Trump in his third term.
Oh, right, yeah.
I don't know if you saw that.
Possible. It's possible.
He did. He said he was on. Let's see. What's the guy's name? Used to be on CNN. Brother was Governor Cuomo. Chris Cuomo was who's now with News Nation. I had him on a couple of weeks ago. I think it was fairly recently, and he said that. He said, "Yeah, I think that Trump is going to win the 2028 and be elected to a third term." And he's like, "Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Is there going to be some kind of civil war or something like that? Are you going to do it by force?" He goes, No. There's going to be a legal way to do it, but I won't say anything until just right now. But the fact that they're even thinking that when the Constitution is pretty cut and dried, that you can only be elected to the presidency 2 times. So I don't know what they're thinking, but that scares a lot of people.
Bannon likes to stir things up. That's his style all the time.
Yeah,
right?
it's good.
He's always throwing I don't know. I don't want to say fireballs, but he's always throwing it up to mix it up like that. He loves doing that.
He's very good. He's a good debater. He's interesting.
Well, he's definitely interesting. He definitely gets eyeballs, and I guess that's why.
Definitely.
Okay, so jumping back here, here's another one from LBC from a different perspective, more related to the last comment you were talking about there about how this is viewed in terms of Russia and what you can and can't say, especially with this war in Ukraine, etc. And here they're trotting out the good old tried and true stab in the back theory.
The last payment on the Anglo-American loan, this was a loan made to the United Kingdom, enabling its economy.
I think it's the other one, Gary.
After the Second World War. The latest comment you've made, Phillips, is that Ukraine was just knifed in the back, with particular reference to this so-called ceasefire in the Black Sea. I mean, even Rupert Murdoch's Times this morning is sceptical, even close to being critical, which suggests that there is not much cause for celebration, certainly not in Kyiv.
This is where this was heading. Trump wants to work with Putin. I mean, people seem to forget this and think that the United States is somehow going to negotiate even-handedly with Ukraine and Russia. That's a dream. The United States wants to reach a deal with Putin now. In fact, Putin is seen as a valuable friend by Trump. And the whole point of this, one of the key things Trump wants to do is end sanctions on Russia as soon as possible. All his talk about sanctions is, to put it kindly, BS.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gary, to you first this time. This American commentator, I'm not familiar with who he was, but he's basically saying, look, Putin, Trump, he's just for Russia. That's all there is to it. He doesn't care about anybody else, Ukraine, Europe, nobody. He just wants to do Putin's bidding.
Yeah, I agree with him in that sense, but not the philosophy or the psychology behind it. I think Trump wants peace, and he's willing to. I think he's willing to patiently wait until he can just push Zelensky to the side. We know that Putin has made it clear what he wants. He's not going to do anything without lifting the sanctions, and I'm surprised that Trump hasn't lifted the sanctions earlier. I was also surprised that he reinitiated military aid and intel for Ukraine. So some of that I don't quite understand his thinking, Trump's thinking, by doing both those things.
But yeah,
I do think.
Yeah, I think that really shows the disparity between what lens you look through when you see reality. Because you had this James fella here was saying, oh yeah, he was interpreting the intent behind it by saying, oh, he just wants to help Russia, he just wants to help Putin. Whereas I think through the actual Trump lens, which I think you were alluding to, he's just saying, dude, the war's over. Your side lost. Don't just throw more money into a lost cause. Let's lift sanctions, do what it's going to take to get Russia to actually end the fighting so the people stop dying and we can start getting back to having some kind of normalized relations. I think that's his lens. And yet, obviously, the LBC guy, Ian, was only too excited to talk about the stab in the back theory.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Trump's biggest problem, as far as I'm concerned, this is my own perspective, is the people that are in the people that are advising him. I mean, Colonel McGregor, as far as I'm concerned, nailed it really simply. All Trump has to do is say, this is not my war. I did not start this war. I don't support this war. I don't want Russian kids dying, Ukrainian kids dying. I'm withdrawing all military aid and personnel now to show that we are stopping this war, and then talk to the Russians. Now, unfortunately, the bad side to that is everyone that I know will be going, oh, you can't talk to the Russians. Well, I'm really sorry, but you have to. You don't have any choice. Because if you want this to stop, there's a conversation to be had with the Russians, whether you like them or dislike them or agree or disagree with what's happened or what's gone on. That conversation has to be had. And that's what Trump should have done. But he's being advised. And, as I said, the shipments of arms have continued. The intelligence has resumed. It's just insane. He didn't need to do that as far as I'm concerned. Yeah,
agreed. I think in one aspect, I think Trump is waiting for Zelensky to just bury himself, which it's happening. It's happening slower than we'd like it to.
Yeah.
But I think that's what, by him, resisting and standing up and trying to cozy up to the European Union and their coalition of the willing, and rather than just trying to work with Trump and acquiesce because because of the losing hand that he's playing. But Zelensky's resistant. We've seen him playing his proud self, trying to just prolong things and play it out with the European side rather than just acquiescing and going with Trump.
Well, he's definitely doing that. In fact, I think it was, I didn't get to see it all because just before we came on the air, there was a live broadcast that Zelensky was giving in Paris today. By the way, we're going to have a show on a lot of this coalition of the willing meeting in Paris today, this afternoon at 3 p.m. I don't want to just kind of give you a little taste of what that is. We'll talk about that in a second. But in that he's still trying to take positions that are contrary to what President Trump is saying. The things that Trump is being willing to talk about. So I don't know. Maybe Gary's right. Maybe that Trump is just saying, well, I'm going to give you some rope, and you're going to end up hanging yourself because I'm not going down that path.
It's like a naughty child, and one parent's really strict and one isn't. Well, when the child's been told off, guess who he or she runs to? The non-strict parent. And he's not going to get a listening ear from Trump. He's not going to get an arm around the shoulder and a hug saying, come on, we can do this. We got to do this. He's not going to get that from Trump. He's not going to get any sympathy. He's killed 1 million of his own people. Whereas the Europeans will embrace him. He's like the Churchill. He's the one man stopping Russia from attacking Poland. All this nonsense, because that's the narrative that they spin. It is just utter nonsense. That's the problem.
Yeah, that is a big problem. I just want to jump real quick here. I got someone ask a question on the chat today. They said, unrelated, but in the spirit of normal relations, Mr. Davis, have you considered going to Russia for the Victory Day parade on May 9th? It is also America's victory, and you can get a good free interview. I actually have been trying to get a couple of interviews from some folks in Russia, but it's something that I gotta carry through, try to thread the needle, because if you go too far, and like if I just attended, though, I get, like Ian said there a second ago, I get blasted as, oh, you're just pro-Russian. You may notice on our channel, we try to do we put a lot of people
Yeah.
on both sides of this issue. We always put quotes from both sides because we want to tell you the total truth or so. But it's a bit of a challenge because I want to do that in the spirit of saying, hey, we're going to give the full balanced view to this. But it's something I got to be careful with because otherwise we could undercut ourselves. So it's a challenge.
It's a really difficult line to follow, but yeah, it's a fair channel. Your viewership's going up. I mean, I was just talking to somebody this morning about it. The irony is you've got these big, huge media. You know, you've got CBS and Fox and CNN and the BBC, Rupert Murdoch, Sky. These are huge, vast global news networks with global reach. But if you want to find out what's really going on, you come to a small podcast like this and speak to people that are cutting through all of the propaganda, trying to get to the truth. What an insane world we're at. What an insane world we're at.
It is, and that's one of the things that Gary and I love, and why we made this channel in the first place is because we don't have any corporate sponsors. We don't have any sponsors of any sort. We exist solely by viewers watching us, and some of them, like this the last person who just very kindly contributed 10 pounds to the cause here. That's what allows us to keep going. And we don't have anybody telling us what we can and can't say. You mentioned like the Rupert Murdoch channels, whatever. Rupert Murdoch has some influence over what they say and what they cover and how they cover
Absolutely.
it. Whereas we
100%.
just tell the truth, and God willing, that's what we'll do for the history of this channel.
Yeah, you know, Danny, when you think back, Danny, just I don't know, the last year, think of how many times that we've played Putin, how many times we've showed sound bites from Putin. Lavrov. How many times have we showed sound bites from Zelensky? You know, all the time. We have several in one episode, and then my gosh, you know, tens of versions of both those guys. I'm just using those two for an example because we're showing both sides. You go to the legacy media. When are you seeing either? Well, you'll see Zelensky for sure.
Yeah.
You hardly ever see Putin. You hardly ever see Lavrov. It takes somebody like Tucker. To go over there and do an interview, and you'll see Lavrov there. But otherwise, on any of the legacy media, you're never hearing these gentlemen speak for themselves. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, again, oh, you're just, you know, you're Russian sympathizers, you're in Putin's pocket, you know, all of that stuff. Well, that's, you know, I mean, anybody that watches this channel regularly knows that we play Zelensky just as much as we play Putin. And that's the very fact of why we're doing that. So you can hear. The viewers out there are smart enough; they can make up their own minds. We're playing you these people so you can hear them from their own mouths. We don't tell you what they say; we show you what they say. A lot of people even get us mad. Quit showing this little green goblin. He makes me throw up every time I hear him talk. But we do that for a reason, so that we're not going to tell you what to think. We're going to play you their words for themselves, and then we trust you. That you're smart enough to make up your own mind. And I know that is the beauty of what we're doing here. We try and bring it all, and we're all trying to make sense of it, just like you guys are trying to make sense of it.
Just a little bit of fun on a complete side note. So about, I don't know, a couple of hours ago. So Steve Jeremy, who's former director of the MOD policy unit, obviously is great guest and friend of your show. Great guy. And the same with Ian Proud, former senior diplomat. Based in Moscow. So we're a little WhatsApp group, and I messaged them earlier. They Steve Jeremy posted about the coalition of the willing.
You weren't talking about any war plans, were you? I mean, I'm just
no comment.
I'm sorry. Okay, I couldn't resist. Please continue.
And we were talking about Starmer's coalition of the willing and where it's going, or more importantly, where it's really not going. So I put on there a little sportsman's bet. I don't know, forgive me, but a sportsman's bet is when you have a bet, but nothing happens. You know, you don't owe me any, I don't owe you anything. But I had a little sportsman's bet that I think that they were saying it's not going to probably last till the end of April. I think it will last just past April into early May. That's not because it's got feet and it's going anywhere. It's going nowhere. It's dead in the pan. It's just the sheer political will to hang on to the last clutches of this anti-Russian fervor that's ingrained into everybody. But yeah, it's all going to collapse. I mean, it's collapsed anyway. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think that that Victory Day celebration, I think that the Western side wants to do everything possible to make sure they don't have this to celebrate on that day. Even if it's 2 days later, I think that they would push it off to the very last minute to make sure that just to try and spoil the the Russian ability to say that kind of thing, but and oblivious to the fact that you're talking about a sportsman event there that doesn't cost anything. These kind of actions cost Ukrainian lives.
Absolutely.
But dragging this stuff out, I mean, it's just incomprehensible and frankly immoral in my view.
Yeah, that's why I think
you're
Trump's
right,
being advised really badly. He should have just said, look, I want this to stop. There's enough bloodshed on both sides. This stops now. America's not involved in this war anymore. Not that we ever were, I should say. But, Blinken always used to go, we're just helping out a friend and all this nonsense. I mean, it used to drive me insane. We're just helping out a friend. No, you started this. You pushed that started this. And I think, there's a bit of hesitancy on Trump's part because he was talking about the Nord Stream a couple of weeks ago. And he was asked about who blew up the Nord Stream. And he says, oh, well, it wasn't Russia, but I don't want to say any more. I don't want to get my country in any more trouble, which was quite a funny thing to say, which is what he said. And I think I personally would take that as an admission that the Americans blew it up, which is what I've always thought anyway. But, there has to be a frank conversation about.
Oh, went silent there.
Yeah. Ian, check your microphone for us.
Ian, we can't hear you.
Hear us, Ian?
It didn't look like he can hear us either, but he's very animated. Oh
yes.
Man, what is going on?
We should pretend. What does he say? We can put words in his mouth right now, Danny.
I think he's saying, "Boy, I love coming on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. It's so awesome." Ian, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can. Can you hear anything?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, I can. Sorry, someone was WhatsApp calling me. I just.
Okay. We didn't hear a word you just said. We could see you making all kinds of motions, but whatever you said, we missed it.
Yeah, no, very, 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 very briefly. I was just saying about Trump. Trump said that was asked about the Nord Stream, and he said, "Oh, well, I can tell you it wasn't the Russians, but I don't want to say anymore. I don't want to get my country in any more trouble," which is really quite a funny thing to say. But people need to understand about America's involvement. America's had, 10 plus years of, we're just coming to the aid of a friend. Poor little Ukraine and big evil Russia's attacking poor little Ukraine, and we're just helping a friend out. Who wouldn't do that? It's a completely reasonable thing to say. But, there's just got to be some reality and some honesty in saying what's really, really happened. And I think that needs to come out. It's just going to take time, though. It's going to take a very long time.
And we're going to actually talk about some of that also in our 3 p.m. show today. There's some comments just from yesterday, or maybe it was even this morning. I don't know when the video was made. It came out today, where Lavrov is talking about those issues about the origins of this and what they've been trying to do all along, et cetera. So, it's important. Look, if we've made mistakes, it's important for us to own up to them. And then not do them anymore, because that kills trust from so many people. If you say one thing and then do something different and then never come clean on it, then who's going to trust you the next time something comes up when it could cost you? You may need them to trust you, but because you've been so untrustworthy, then it's going to end up costing you. Even if you might get over at the moment, it never works out good.
No. Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
So, but anyway, on that note, listen, we really appreciate you coming on today, Ian. It certainly is a pleasure. We are now going to look forward to doing this all the time. I really dig the energy between the three of us here. So I think a lot of our viewers do too. And we're going to look forward to seeing you next time. But be sure and join us today at 3:00, or we're going to see what's been going on with this coalition of the willing in Paris. And you're going to see some of the themes that Ian's been talking about here fleshed out with some of these other comments from the European leaders. But on behalf of Gary and Ian, thank you for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you at 3:00 this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.